Happy Mushoku Sundays, everybody. Welcome back to another impression/skip content video for episode 23 of Mushoku Tensei Season 2. And what a doozy. Yes, the goddess Roxy has descended from the sky and she has saved Rudeus' life. Although you might not entirely get that context because, yes, episode 23, a lot was changed. A lot was changed and it sort of has me concerned. I'm going to make a whole separate video on this, but Refugin has been making a lot of comments on Twitter. And it has there's a lot of fear behind what is being said by him, sort of implying a lot of changes. And these changes seem to be geared around the idea of not making Mushoku Tensei clean and sanitized and acceptable for all, but more so adjusting it a little bit so that those that will accept some will accept the whole story. And again, I'll make a whole video on that and my concerns. I do want to let him continue to discuss this and hopefully some clarifications come out before I jump the gun on it. But yes, it seems obvious with this episode as a lot was changed. We didn't really get a sense of why Roxy went in that room. There was a whole conversation before she even went there, which explains why she goes in there. There's a lot around Rudeus, him actually admitting to Roxy who he is, like what exactly he is. And that's a big deal to me. I don't know about anybody else there, but at least implying the idea of reincarnation is a big deal for Roxy to learn about him. And there's a lot of other things, like including Elinalise giving a pregnancy fear or a shock to Rudeus in order to push him. There's a lot in here that we need to cover. So we'll leave all the other stuff for another video. I do want to make a whole video on people's reaction to Roxy doing this. I want to make a whole video on Refugin's comments. But until then, let's get into the skip content video because it's a lot of what a lot of people want. So let's get into it. Yes, opening up the episode, I kind of alluded to this in the previous skip content video. I did have a feeling that it could possibly cover the whole faces of his parents situation, that Rudeus goes to sleep, suddenly wakes up, and he is at his old body, and he's looking at his parents who are discussing something. And he's not really sure about what they're talking about there. I covered that in the previous video, so if you want to check that out, check that out. But a lot of it has to do with, why didn't I go to my parents' funeral? And this is, again, him connecting to now he lost Paul, and he's feeling really bad about that whole situation. And now he's going, I lost another parent. Now he's thinking about his past life. I should have gone to their funeral. But again, like I mentioned with that whole thing, the big key thing there was him admitting that I was a scumbag. I made up excuses. I didn't want to go, and I was making up excuses about, yeah, they'd look at me and they think I'm a dirtbag and whatnot, so I chose not to go. In the novel, that's when he goes to see Zenith. That's when he discovers that Zenith is a husk, and he goes back to his room. And there's a lot playing through his head about the situation with Paul. And yes, even recounting the actual moment in which Paul died. When he slept, his dreams replayed the moments of Paul's death, slashing at the Hydra swinging its neck, the feeling of being shoved aside, watching the Hydra move again. But Rudeus couldn't move. Paul kicked him out of the way, and he watched as the Hydra head plummeted down in front of him. Then Rudeus jolted awake, checked to make sure that he wasn't dreaming. Then huddled back into bed. He had no willpower to get up. All he could do was think about Paul. Sure, Paul wasn't a praiseworthy human. He was terrible with women and a show-off. He was weak in the face of adversity and escaped in alcohol. He didn't even say anything fatherly before going into battle. By most standards, he was a complete failure as a father. But still, Rudeus loved him. It wasn't the same as the parent and child love Paul felt for him. To Rudeus, Paul was like a partner in crime. Rudeus was mentally older than him, but Paul had more physical years on him. He was also probably well ahead of him in life experiences. None of that really mattered. Age was pointless. When he talked to Paul, he felt like the two of them were on even footing. He couldn't see him as a father, and probably never considered himself his child. But Paul was different. He's seen Rudeus as his child from the very beginning. Him, who was a piece of 30-something recluse on the inside at the time. Him, whose actions thus far had to have been bizarre. Still, Paul regarded him as family, never turning his eyes away. There was areas that he failed as a father, but never faltered in considering him family. Paul never treated him as a stranger. Rudeus was always his son. Even despite his abnormal abilities, he's seen him as his son. He was a father, always had been, even as he carried the burdens far too heavy for him. He continued on to do things for the sake of his family. In the end, even shielding Rudeus, using his body as a father to protect him, his son. I'm going to get emotional on this reading it for the fifth time. He bravely put his life on the line as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And he died. It was strange. Rudeus wasn't even his child, but Paul was still his father. Paul had two real children, not fakes like him. 2 sweet, genuine daughters, Nor and Aisha. If he were going to shield anyone, it should have been them. He also had 2 wives. He spent years desperately searching for one, and the other was supporting him. 2 wives, 2 daughters, 4 people in total. What the hell are you doing leaving them behind, huh, Paul? Rudeus thought angrily. Weren't they important to you? But maybe Rudeus was important to Paul. 2 wives, 2 daughters, and 1 son. Maybe they were all equally important to him. Rudeus never seen him as a father, but Paul thought of him as one of the most important people in his life. Why, Paul? Give me a break. You said it so many times. Rudy, I see you as an adult now. I see you as a man. I got married, bought a house, took guardianship of my sisters. Of course, I felt like an adult. I came to help you. Worked hard in that labyrinth. I saw myself as an adult. You did too, didn't you? That was why you said what you did at the end, right? Save her, even if it kills you. So explain to me, why? Why did you shield me if I'm an adult? What am I supposed to say to Norn and Aisha when I get home? How am I supposed to explain what happened? What am I supposed to do with Zenith, the way she is now? What am I supposed to do from here on out? Tell me, Paul. You were supposed to decide this, weren't you? Damn it, why'd you have to go and die? At least, if I had died, it would have been him here anguishing over what to do instead. Or better yet, if neither of us had died, no one would have to suffer. I can't do it. Sadness bubbled up inside of him. He couldn't stop the tears that flooded out. In my life, my previous one, that is, I didn't even cry when my mother and father died. I hadn't even felt sad. Now that Paul was dead, the tears came naturally. I was sad, and I couldn't believe it. The one person who had to be here, was supposed to be here, was now gone. Paul was a father. Paul was my father. I'd never thought of him as one. And yet, he was every bit the parent to me as the ones in my previous life. An absolute realization for him about his father. And now he again claiming it as father. He thought, and he cried until he was exhausted. He didn't want to do anything. Rudeus lunged lazily about his room. Even with things to do, he couldn't find the will to do them. Elinalise and Lilia came to visit amidst this. They said things, but none of it registered. It was as if they were speaking a foreign language. Not that it mattered. He wouldn't have been able to reply. He had nothing to say, no words to speak to them. Maybe if he was skilled with a sword, able to chop off a Hydra's head, then Paul wouldn't have died. The 2 of them working on chopping heads as Roxy roasted the open wounds. It would have been easy to defeat it, right? If only he could wrap himself in a battle aura. If only he was faster. Then Paul wouldn't have had to shield him. Maybe they should have gone back to the city. Even if it meant dragging Paul back. They could have had a strategy meeting and come with a solid plan. A smart one, not a clumsy one. If they did anything just a bit differently, the outcome might have changed. But it was too late. Paul was dead. He'd never get to see him again. Just like his parents from his previous life. No matter what he said now, it was already too late. Oh, it's so painful. It's so painful. And again, I think the anime does well in sort of portraying Rudeus as being broken, but it's so external. And I think that's the sad thing about a lot of this context that they're skipping. It's so much in his head about how he's stuck and he's thinking, wait, you have children that you should be with, your wives. Why me? Why me? Why would you see me as your son? But he still did. And I am the cause of his death. That's when we get a skipped little segment where we find out again why Roxy ultimately went into Rudeus' room. At a certain pub, Geese, Elinalise, Talhan, and Roxy sat with darkness settling around them. Elinalise spoke up. Paul's dead. Geese said, yeah, sure is. Talhan replied, he'd protect his boy. That's how he'd want to go. Geese fired back, don't think he'd be happy. Not with Zenith like that. It was a shock to all of them. Zenith turned out to be an empty husk. A cruel shock, considering they knew the energetic person she was before. Still, they were adventurers. Death was always close at hand. They would have had the capacity to accept it if she had died. Talhan spoke up. She's alive, right? Who knows? Maybe she can be healed. He said that without much hope in his voice. There was stories occasionally of people being crippled by a monster's poison. Never a story of one recovering. Once the mind was gone, nothing could heal them. Not even god-tier healing magic. Once something went wrong in someone's mind, there was no way to fix it. Elinalise spoke. Even if she was able to walk and talk again, her memories won't return. Talhan replied, what? Sure are talking like you know a lot about the matter, Elinalise. I'm just telling it like it is. Elinalise lived a long life, longer than Talhan and Geese. She had seen similar cases before. It was likely that she did know something. But whatever it It wasn't going to give them any hope, so Talhan didn't press further. The real problem is the boy. Yeah, Geese said. It's not like that kid's under the weather. It goes deeper than that. It's almost like he's a husk, Elinalise said. Rudeus never responded to them when they talked to him, just vacant eyes and simple yas. Roxy then spoke up. Rudy was very attached to Mr. Paul. Roxy pictured young Rudeus taking his sword lessons from Paul. No matter how much Paul beat him to the ground, Rudeus would stand right back up and continue to swing, with an indignant look on his face. He was an embodiment of talent. To Roxy, he looked like he was truly enjoying learning from his father, a blinding source of envy to her, given she never shared such moments with her parents. That's a sad thing that she doesn't acknowledge the fact that her parents literally taught her how to speak language rather than having to use her mind. Geese followed up. Well, I understand how the boss feels, but it's going to be bad if things stay this way. Elinalise agreed. Rudeus wasn't eating, even when they pressed him to. He seemed to be doing the minimum of drinking water at least, but he was growing more gaunt by the day. His eyes were sunken in, and his cheeks were hollow, looking like he had the shadow of death on his face. Everyone thought that he'd soon be joining Paul. I'd like to do something to try to cheer him up, Roxy said. Didn't you always say it was important to get lucky at times like this? Geese said. I can't help him with getting lucky, Elinalise replied. Roxy was the only one that didn't understand what they were talking about. Roxy's very too pure. She's too pure goddess. She then spoke up. What is it that you can't do? Geese and Talhan exchanged looks and pursed their lips. Roxy furrowed her brows suspiciously. Miss Elinalise, do you have some kind of plan? No, I don't, she replied, giving her poker face. Geese then spoke up. Well, how should I put it? Well, in times like this, it's best to enjoy yourself to the fullest and try to forget. Enjoy yourself? Roxy echoed. Men are straightforward. Give them some alcohol, a woman to bed, and they'll get the rush of joy of being alive. Bring a little bit of energy back to them. I mean, yeah, it's not going to return them to how they were, but still. All right, I get it now, Roxy said. Well, I guess you're right. That's just how men are. Yeah. Her cheeks flushed red, and her gaze floated to her lap. Men like to bed women when they were depressed. She was sure that she heard that story once. Mercenaries would pay for women to distract them from their fears after battle. But when Roxy thought of Rudeus and Elinalise together, a dark cloud hung over her heart. He spoke up. Elinalise, you've always said, for as long as I remember, that you were good at consoling men with wounded hearts. I have, she replied. Roxy knew Elinalise had the talent for that type of thing. Surely with her skill, she could get Rudeus back on his feet. The thought of that made her gloomy. But what else could they do? Geese followed up. How unusual. Normally you would be all over someone in the kind of state that Boss is in right now. Roxy couldn't stand seeing Rudeus the way that he was now. Elinalise felt the same, wanted to help him, console him, but she knew what would happen if they returned home. She'd be betraying Cliff and Sylphie. Even Rudeus wouldn't be able to cope with that. She then spoke up. Even I have people I can't bed. Why not Rudy? Roxy's lips hardened. She fixed Elinalise with a glare. You know how much he's suffering? Because, Elinalise paused, remembering Roxy didn't know yet. Because the person he married, his wife, is my granddaughter. Huh? Roxy dropped her cup, spilling it everywhere. What? Rudy's married? Yes, he is. And his child will be born soon. Oh, well, I mean, of course it is. Rudy's that age already. Roxy couldn't mask how shaken she was. Lifting her tankard off the ground and attempting to drink from it, she called for another drink, the strongest they had. Her eyes swiveled as she folded her arms over her chest. Marriage, of course, it was normal. The thought of how she acted in the labyrinth made her grit her teeth. The advances that she made on him, thinking that he was single. He was receptive of her, on a level that she'd never experienced before. But perhaps he didn't reject her because they were acquaintances. From the sidelines, it must have looked hysterical. The most entertaining buffoonery. She wanted to scream, why didn't anyone tell me? But it remained lodged in her throat. Anyhow, her feelings weren't what mattered right now. She then spoke up. Still, even if he's married, this is an emergency. Couldn't you both be forgiven for doing it just once? She didn't even understand the words that she was speaking. She just felt strongly about helping Rudeus back up. Perhaps, Elinalise replied, but I can't be the one to do it. Roxy couldn't understand the emotion in her voice, or her visible frustration. The server arrived with Roxy's drink, and she gulped it down in one go. It spread throughout her body like a wildfire. It probably tasted delicious, as her body was craving alcohol. Elinalise then followed up. Besides, Rudeus and I have already... Elinalise paused just for a moment, pursed her lips. Well, even if I can't help, Geese can drag him off to a brothel, right? Not sure about that, Geese replied. You really think Rudeus will cheer up having sex with some girl that he doesn't know? Well, what he does need right now is to lean on someone that he trusts, Elinalise said. So, Lilia? Geese replied. Elinalise shot a glare at Geese. This is exactly... Okay, I get it. Don't get pissy. Elinalise's feelings were complicated. She didn't want to intrude on his marriage with Sylphie, but she did want to help Rudeus. If she betted him, she can get him back on his feet. Elinalise was confident of that. This wasn't the first or even the second time that she was in a situation like this, where she'd help a man heal his wounds in his heart. But she couldn't help to think that it would be a disastrous choice she couldn't take back. she was conflicted. Normally, she didn't mind being the one to get her hands dirty. She played that role numerous times, but her desires not to betray Cliff got in the way. She simply couldn't. There was a long silence before Geese finally spoke up. Anyway, we got Zenith in that state that she's in right now. I want to get the boss back on his feet as quickly as possible and hightail it out of this town. Everyone sighed. Yeah, I don't disagree, Talhan said. Everyone was exhausted. After all, it had been 6 years since the displacement incident, a substantial period of time during which they'd traveled the Central Continent, the Demon Continent, and the Begret Continent, even venturing into the teleportation labyrinth. It was intense, rough going, and they labored through it, both the good and the bad times, with hope of coming out laughing together when it was over. The displacement incident had been an unpleasant affair, but the time they had spent together hadn't been completely awful. Their broken, disconnected party had slowly come back together again, before being ripped apart again. Elinalise and Talhan had teamed up, while Geese hopped into action for Paul. Paul and Talhan had reconciled their differences. Paul and Elinalise even fought side by side once more at the very end. None of them had ever dreamed they would come back together like this. But there they were, with Paul at the center. All they had to do was rescue Zenith and locate Ghislaine, wherever she wandered off to. Then they could all share a drink together again. That's what they thought. But now, Paul was dead. It was enough to overwhelm them with an indescribable sense of exhaustion, like it was all for naught. The feeling you get spending hours building something for it to fall apart at the very end. Rudeus wasn't the only one overcome with lethargy. Talhan spoke up. Don't be so glum. Rudeus is Paul's boy. He might be down the dumps now, but he'll pick himself back up eventually on his own. No doubt. I certainly hope you're right, Elinalise replied. Elinalise and Geese nodded vaguely. They both knew Rudeus' weakness. But he was already 16. He wasn't a child anymore. It was grim, but he was remarkable. Death visited everyone, especially for adventurers. Everyone's parents died eventually. Everyone had to deal with this at some point in their life. That was why they assumed Rudeus would be able to do the same. While they all nodded, Roxy did not, preoccupied with her memories of long ago. After finishing the skip scene, you can kind of get a sense of why they probably got rid of this, is to, let Roxy explain all that stuff towards the end there, which again makes a lot of sense, and I knew they were going to skip this entire scene because so few scenes are seen from outside of Rudeus' perspective. They kind of keep it to his perspective most of the time. But like I said, it kind of explains the mindset of Roxy coming to the situation, is that, okay, they're saying this is the way to fix him. Elinalise has done this many times. He's gonna die. He's not eating. He's not replying. They need to get home. We then cut to Rudeus' perspective, realizing that it was evening as he looked out the window. Spacing out, he wondered how many days went by, or even if it even mattered. Suddenly, a knock came at the door. It was Roxy. I'm going to explain this entire situation because, like I said, there's a few parts that are, yes, altered significantly. Roxy did not pull him onto the bed and climb on top of him like the anime did. Rudy, do you have a moment? Roxy stood at the door. Teacher. He spoke after a long pause. It felt like ages since he had spoken. His voice was hoarse. Roxy hastily made her way towards him. Something was different. Then he realized that she wasn't wearing her usual robes. Her shirts and her pants were pieces of thinly woven fabric, a rare sight. Pardon me. She stiffly popped herself down on the bed beside him. After several seconds of silence, Roxy spoke slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. Want to go out somewhere with me for a change of pace? Huh? There are many magical items in the city that you wouldn't be able to see in any other continents. It might be interesting to take a look at them, don't you think? No, I'm not in the mood. Oh, you're not. Sorry. He knew that she was trying to cheer him up. Normally, he'd follow her like a puppy, but he simply didn't feel like it right now. Silence filled the room. Roxy then spoke up again. It's unfortunate what happened to Mr. Paul and Miss Zenith. Unfortunately, he thought? Was this really something that could be summed up in just one word? Well, it wasn't her family after all. I can still remember, in great detail, the 5 of us living together in Buena Village. That might have been the happiest time of my life, Roxy said. Roxy spoke quietly, her warm hands gripping his. As an adventurer, it's not unusual for people close to you to die. I know the pain. I've experienced it before. Please don't lie to me, he replied. Rudeus met Roxy's parents. He knew they were still alive. She might not have seen him for quite a while, but surely that hadn't changed. Rudeus spoke up. Your mother and father are doing just fine, aren't they? That's true. It's been a few years since I saw them, but they seemed well. I'm sure they still have 100 years ahead of them. Then you don't understand. A wave of emotion flooded up in his chest, and he batted her hand away. Don't throw those words around so casually. The last bit of strength drained from him as he yelled at her. Roxy continued. The person who died was someone who formed a party with me and taught me the basics right after I became an adventurer. I wouldn't go so far as call him a parent, but I did think of him as an older brother. He died, shielding me. Like you, I also anguished over his death. Of course, I don't think it's as bad as what happened to you. Losing your father and finding your mother only to be sick. But it did leave me deeply depressed. That's why I think I can understand a little bit. Even if it's just a sliver of what you're feeling right now. Roxy didn't understand how Rudeus felt. Having reincarnated, stuck between past and present, he wasn't just saddened by Paul's death, nor was he simply lamenting that Zenith became a husk. He realized something. Ever since he was reincarnated and decided to do it all over again, he thought he was doing a good job. But in the end, he was just ignoring something important. He turned his back on the discord between him and his family in his previous life, kept his eyes averted even after being reborn. As a result, he made the same mistake a second time in this world. That was a line that broke me so hard when I first read this. It broke me so hard. I did the same damn thing again. He'd been unable to give anything back to his parents before Paul died, and Zenith became a husk. He did the same thing all over again, repeated the same mistakes. One he couldn't take back, his previous 34 years and current 16. 50 years he'd lived in total, and yet done it again. He was hopeless in his previous life, but now, thinking he could change, he was confronted with reality, and nothing had changed. While it looked good on the surface, in truth, he'd hardly budged past square one. Getting back on his feet seemed hopeless. Knowing that Roxy had processed a similar experience and managed to get back on hers did little to reassure him. Ugh. Roxy then spoke up again. I was truly happy during my days in Buena Village. I originally came to the Ashra Kingdom wanting to work there, but I couldn't find any jobs. I decided to take a temporary position in the countryside as a home tutor. But then you were overflowing with talent, and Paul and Zenith treated me so warmly. I think they were the ones that really taught me what kindness, true kindness, of a family is. Roxy looked to Rudeus, her eyes soft and warm. They were like a second family. She stood up on his bed, slipped behind him, and knelt, wrapping her arms around his head as if cradling him. Rudy, I think I can share in your sadness. Rudeus felt something soft pressing against the back of his head. He could hear a gentle pulse of her heart, a soothing sound. Why did it comfort him so? He wondered, why did it make him feel like things would be okay? Her scent was relaxing. Up until now, when he faced difficulty, it had to be strangely comforting to remember this smell and the things that she had taught him. When he was in the grip of his ED, just thinking of Roxy had been enough to help him endure. Why was that? The answer hung in the back of his throat and refused to come out. Roxy spoke up again. I'm your teacher, and though I'm small and inadequate, I have lived longer than you, and I'm tough. I don't mind if you lean on me. He took hold of her hands. It was small, yet felt so big. Just looking at it brought him comfort. He wondered if this sense of relief would grow stronger if he got closer. I'm sure that, even if things are tough, you can lessen the burden by splitting it with someone else. Roxy pulled away, but then he drew her back out of instinct. She panicked as she fell into his lap, her face close and eyes met. Her eyes were sleepy, moist with tears. Her face was red, lips tightly shut. He put his hand on her back, guiding her close. Her heart was thundering furiously, and she felt warm. We can do it, Roxy stuttered. Do what? He thought. I mean, I heard that a man's heart can feel lighter if he takes a woman to bed. Who the heck told her that? Ah, Elinalise. Just what was that elf telling Roxy at a time like this, he thought. She spoke so fast, her words jumbled together. Women feel the same. When things are tough, they want something to make them forget. I'm also devastated with Mr. Paul's death. So if that's what you want to do, I don't mind if you take me to bed with you. That's right. I want you to help me forget. But my body's kind of plain. If you're not interested, you could go to the brothel instead. He had immense respect for her, just as she was. What would it be like if he did as she suggested? Anyway, I may not look it, but I am quite experienced. I'm sure I can perform much better than whatever girl that you might find in the streets. Just think of this as a casual thing. A way to wash away all the bad. As a way to test things out, just once. Her incoherent explanations were lost on him, but he still found himself invested. If her heart was this soothing just to listen to, how much relief might he get if he find their body pressed together? His mind lingered on that excuse as she babbled. Well, if you're really particular, and being with someone who is skilled, maybe you could bow your head to Miss Elinalise, and suddenly, he pushed her down on the bed, roughly, violently. Maybe he just had frustration to spare. The next morning, the first thing to greet him was Roxy's sleeping face. She looked so innocent, with her hair let down. At the same time, the thought that he had screwed up ran through his mind. A sigh escaped, wondering how he was going to explain it to Sylphie. Yet another thing for him to be concerned about. But for some reason, his vision felt clearer, as if everything he'd anguished over had been a dream. There was still a weight that clung to him, but he didn't feel like rock bottom anymore. Why was it so effective? Because he performed the act associated with bringing life to the world? Had that eased his sadness of the loss of Paul? Maybe not, but having sex, he'd more or less pushed the problem aside for now. Roxy's eyes fluttered open. Like I said, there's like so much this whole segment, and I think it's so much different in the anime. I mean, I think the anime sort of turned this entire scene just into a romantic thing. I think the entire episode just turned the whole thing with Roxy and just to romance. Just a harem romance kind of situation. But again, with everything that happened with the bar, it's really that indication of Elinalise kind of, and Geese, let's be honest, pushing upon Roxy the idea that, okay, he's not going to get up. Is he ever going to get up? And the only way to really fix him right now is to sleep with him. And so with nobody wanting to go along with this idea, she kind of goes it herself. But I do like the fact that even though when I read this, I wasn't happy, I didn't like the idea of Rudy cheating on Sylvie. Honestly, and I honestly felt like up until this point, Roxy wasn't a good fit for Rudeus. And it's really around the idea that I think that he admires her way too much. He puts her on a pedestal, like she's a goddess. And so thinking about that, like, what is love? I didn't really feel like that was there. Yeah, I think that he respects her immensely for saving his life when he first came to this world. But at the same time, I didn't see as a romance kind of thing. And again, I wanted Rudeus to be faithful. But it kind of plays out this idea, like when Roxy comes in there, she's trying to give him all these options, and she's trying to connect to him. And it's a lot to do with trying to say, I have similar experiences. And again, that's in the mindset that she doesn't know about his previous life. He just lost his parents. Well, yeah, Paul and Zenith were family to me too. So it feels like I have lost a father. And I have lost somebody who has saved my life. Somebody that I seen as a brother. So she's trying to equate herself to him to kind of hopefully get that equal and share in the suffering. But yes, it ultimately leads to what is different than the anime itself is eventually he feels comforted by her. And the moment she goes to pull away, he pulls her back in, and she's like, okay, well, if this is what you want, if this will work, you can do it. And then he pushes her down, and that's it. Again, quite different than, you know, him getting upset, getting to stand up, and her yanking him down and straddling him. It was significantly different. And I seen in the PV, and I'm like, well, maybe it's just the framing of the PV. Nope, they completely changed it. They completely changed how it kind of plays out, which is fine. Apparently, the anime wants Roxy to be a little bit more dominating. Where our canon's changing to Roxy being extremely forward, which is much different than who Roxy is. But yeah, Roxy wakes up and says good morning, and then reverting her eyes said, how was it? He couldn't lie. He was horribly rough with her. He knew immediately the claim of being experienced was a bald-faced lie, but he didn't let it bother him. For her part, Roxy had welcomed him openly. Even the pain, he was both grateful and remorseful. Complimenting her felt wrong, given that he was in love with Sylvie. Honestly, her body was a bit small, and it didn't quite fit his. And he'd be lying if he said that it didn't feel good. It was true. Even now, he felt relaxed. There was no reason to lie if it would hurt her. It was amazing, he said. Roxy's face heated up gradually. Thank you, but no, that's not what I meant by how it was. I meant, how was your heart feeling? Any lighter? Oh, that's what she meant. Oops, yeah, it does. Here's another sad skip by the anime, and this is really where it gets into Roxy being revealed by Rudeus through him thinking he's hiding it about his whole entire previous life. Roxy then spoke up. Then as a repayment, I'd be happy if you put your arms around me. Sure. He did as requested. Her skin felt soft, damp because of the sweat. Her drumming pulse was reassuring. Your arms sure are strong, not much like a magician. Yeah, I've been training. Her fingers traced his chest and arm. The motion was so endearing, it threatened to sway his love for Sylvie. He slowly peeled himself away from her and got up. Teacher, can I ask you something? Something strange. She paused before saying, what is it? She must have read the room. Roxy's expression turned serious. She sat up and tucked her legs beneath her. Sitting up, she was completely naked. It was so sexy and stimulating that he had to avert his eyes and cover his lower half in order to continue the conversation. This story is just fiction, something I made up. He told her the tale of a man. When he was young, terrible things happened to him, and he secluded himself. He lived purely on his parents' financial support for decades. Then one day, they died. The man didn't attend their funeral. No, he did the worst thing a person could ever do. The other members of the family seen that, and they beat him senseless, drove him from his home. Although the man had nothing, he was lucky to find himself reborn in a new world. He turned over a new leaf and began to mend his ways. Life was going smoothly, and he thought that he could be happy if things stayed that way. But he made a terrible mistake and let someone precious to him die. It was then that he recalled the death of his parents. Though it was late, he finally mourned their loss. That was the story. He basically just told Roxy that he's a reincarnate, and she picks up on it. The more he recounted, the more pent-up bile festering in his heart seemed to spill out. Maybe all he wanted was for someone to hear his story. Maybe it was really as simple as that. What do you think that man should do? He asked. She was quiet for a while. The story came out of nowhere. Maybe she was struggling with how to respond. He was sure that she didn't think the person in the story was him. She was clever. She might have guessed there was some other meaning behind it. Roxy then finally spoke up. If it were me, I would go visit my parents' grave. Even now, it's not too late. I'd also talk to the other family members. But the graves of those family members are so far away, the man can't easily go and see them. If he does go see them, he may never be able to return. The man has a life of his own now. He's got his own family in this new world, and he cherishes them. So, he can't go back? Roxy asked. No. There's a good chance that he couldn't go back, even if he wanted to. Roxy fell silent again. The time was briefer than the last. In that case, there's nothing to be done. All he can do is cherish the family that he has right in front of him. Her words were incredibly cliche. Anyone could have said the same, or thought the same. They weren't special in the least. Roxy continued. Even Paul would have wished for you to do the same, Rudy. She said it plainly, stating the obvious. Her words were trite platitudes. Words he'd heard somewhere before. Please, look to the future. Everyone is waiting for you, Rudy. And yet, hearing it made his heart feel as though the weight had been lifted. She picked up on it. And it's to his own fault because he follows it up saying, no, I can't do this and do it. She's picked up on it at that point. She's like, okay, Rudy, if you're having this problem, you can't do it. Just go to your family, talk to your family. She now knows essentially that he is a reincarnate. It wasn't just her words that were commonplace. The death of his parents from his previous life, even Paul's death, they were inevitable events. All he could do now was face them and accept them. He was here after all, alive in this world, a world that continued on. He felt anxious knowing that he would have to relay Paul's death and Zenith's disability to the others. He felt anxious about a future full of unknowns, but he couldn't run away. He had no idea what he should do, but all he could do was solve each issue one after another. Accepting the current time and moving forward is important. I can see that. This is what he decided to do ever since he found himself in this world, right? Live life to the fullest. So he couldn't turn his eyes away. No matter what ordeals lay ahead of him, he would overcome them. He had to overcome them, even though overcoming them wouldn't make the pain disappear entirely. It would just bring a degree of relief. It felt as if he had broken free from the chains that weighed him down. Teacher? Yes, Roxy replied. Thank you. Roxy saved him once again. No amount of gratitude could ever repay her for that. And that's the other big skip chapter moment or skip moment in the entire episode itself. Such a good moment right there. And again, him technically finally, why it's so big and why it kind of pains me that it was removed is this is the moment which Rudeus is telling somebody else his biggest secret. Yeah, technically Nanahoshi knows that as well, but having somebody that he can relay this to and get into his family and what it means to him in this world is the important part, and she's there to essentially accept that, and thus, finally, all that weight is off my shoulders. But yeah, that's when they go to leave the room, and yeah, of course, Elinalise happens to walk out right at that moment. If you guys aren't catching the hints that it seems like Elinalise has been setting this whole thing up, you're crazy. But yeah, he goes to see Zenith and Lilia, which I think this is huge. I love how they portray this scene because you do see Lilia sitting there, and they did a really good job. You kind of see the fact that her eyes are... She's not doing good. She's tired. She's having to wait on Zenith hand and foot. And me being a person that has dealt with somebody that has had deterioration like that, lost their memories, it is a very painful emotional and physical experience because you have to do everything for them. And yes, it's mentally taxing as well because the person in front of you that used to be happy and so bubbly and energetic is gone. And I don't wish that upon anybody. The experience that I've had with that, I don't wish it upon anybody. And it was everything around Zenith right now pains me. I can't. It hurts every time I read anything about Zenith. But again, there's so much here about Rudeus going, okay, I can do this. I need to take everything step by step. And immediately when he goes in there, Lilia's already saying, I'll handle it. This is my job. Not wanting to admit that she wants to do it because she loves Zenith. No, it's just my job. But, yeah, she can't really do anything about it. Yeah, you have Shiera mentioned apparently that it was a side effect to the crystal itself, the mana being trapped in the crystal itself. I think the anime mentions it strictly, it's a side effect of being trapped in the crystal, but it's specifically the mana being trapped inside the crystal. But yeah, at that point, they decided they're going to head home. They have a little brief meeting to figure out what they're going to do. They gathered together. Rudeus informed everybody that they're going to be leaving the city. It was like Rudeus was taking up the leader's mantle. Everyone followed him. Perhaps they've seen him as Paul's replacement. If so, he needed to be worthy of that role. He explained their route, but avoided mentioning the teleportation circle, giving them a strict warning against mentioning this unique method to anyone. Elinalise mentioned the fact that geese can, kick back a couple drinks and spill the beans, so probably shouldn't say anything. But Geese said that he wouldn't mention the boss's name, so he didn't have to worry. Rudeus did consider avoiding giving anyone the exact location, or possibly blindfolding them beforehand. When Geese asked if he was really good for the trip, Rudeus asked if he looked like he was alright. He said, no, you don't really, but, well, you do look a lot better than you did before. Well, okay, I'm fine then. Rudeus wasn't okay yet at all, but Roxy got him back on his feet at least. He really did have his doubts that he could make it all the way back home. He inquired Lilia about Zenith's condition, and if she thought that she'd be able to handle it. But Lilia seemed earnest in her intentions that she'd take full care of her along the way. He'd help, of course, but would need to slow their pace if Zenith's stamina became an issue. On this note, Geese offered to get a wagon. They were drowning in cash now. It seemed that while Rudeus was steeped in sorrow, Geese and the others hired people to collect the treasure from the Hydra's room. With it being as old as it was, and countless adventurers dying there, the magic items were abundant. They also stripped the Hydra of its scales, or rather, magic stones that could absorb mana. All of that netted them a colossal fortune. Geese also had a load to carry on his back and sell in Astra. With Paul dying and Rudeus grieving, it sort of irritated him that Geese was preoccupied with making more cash. But for the sake of their futures, it was foolish not to retrieve what they could. Money was essential. And at least this way, everyone was repaid for their assistance. Geese's judgment was correct in the end. Not that Rudeus was on any high ground due to him doing nothing. Seemed Geese gave Lilia Rudeus's portion. They allotted him a massive portion, partly because he received Paul's share, but also because Talhan gave him half of theirs, saying that he wasn't useful this time. Vera and Shira also gave a split of theirs to Lilia to help out with Paul being gone. Rudeus felt everyone had done the best that they could, so he felt that they should have taken their share. However, he wasn't going to push back on a gift. It was true that things were going to get harder. Geese spoke up. We also did a thorough sweep of the final area, but never found any hint as to why Zenith was there. Nothing, Well, thank you for looking. Nah, it was nothing. They had no idea how she got there, but even discovering how, it wouldn't guarantee her recovery. They would just have to wait for treatment when they got home. With that, he assigned Geese and Elinalise to do preparations for the trip. He was sure he could trust them with it. They planned their trip in detail. They were experienced, but Rudeus didn't want to lose anyone else. He also made sure to route them away from the bandits that they encountered before. To transport Zenith, Geese purchased a one-person carriage, pulled by a beast that looked like an armadillo. It seemed designed for desert travel. The beast was apparently a domesticated creature from the eastern reaches of the Vagrant continent. Rudeus figured that it was expensive and that they could bring it with them. He was sure that someone with a fancy for such beasts would buy it. Travels went smoothly, and they easily slid past the bandits. They ran into monsters, but they posed no danger. They had 2 warriors, 2 magicians, 1 warrior mage, and a healer. There was power difference between them, but they were well balanced. Though they were missing 1 swordsman, who should have been making the journey with them. Traveling without a left hand proved to be more inconvenient than he imagined. It didn't hurt, but he tried to use it without thinking. A lot of things proved difficult without 2 hands. But fortunately, Roxy was there to assist every time. Ever since that night, she was glued to him, supporting him, and made a habit of sticking to his left side. If anything happened, she was right there to assist, almost like a lover. He was dense. He told himself he wouldn't be. But he even realized at this point that Roxy had feelings for him. One night, while on guard duty, he called out to her, sitting next to him at a campfire. She was leaning against him, and he could feel the softness and warmth of her shoulder. It was like they were lovers. They did do something lovers do. The night they spent together, him leaning on her, indulging in her kindness, it might have lent itself to a misunderstanding that they were lovers, or at least that might have been what she wanted. She might not be so bold with her affections if she knew. But no, she wasn't the problem. It was him. He was cheating. He swore fidelity to Sylvie, and yet he was here breaking that vow. Maybe it was best to make things clear. Ever since he first met Roxy, he relied on her greatly. She taught him magic and language. In a way, he'd only been able to befriend Zenoba because of her. Roxy was his mental support. He owed Roxy so much. Plus, she had gone so far as to use her body to comfort him this time. Even though it was her first time, she offered it up to pull him out of darkness. Weak on his knees, she extended her hand to him. Even now, she was keeping her true feelings to herself to lend him aid. How would that look or feel for him to cast her aside once everything was over? Wasn't it horribly disrespectful? He had to stop the self-appeasement, though. Talking about how she saved him was excuses. He loved Roxy. That's right. He loved her. If you asked who he loved more between her and Sylvie, he would say Roxy, of course. That was a joke. That was a joke. Love for each of them was equal, but different. That was why he was wavering. A moment where he loved Sylvie, but loved Roxy too. But he swore fidelity to Sylvie. While broken, a promise was a promise, even if broke once before. Sylvie did say that she was okay with a second woman, but he dismissed those words, swearing only Sylvie. And she was so happy when she heard that. He couldn't betray her. That's when he told Roxy that yes, He's married and has a child on the way. Her shoulders gave a jolt. Then she muttered that she already knew that. She heard it from Elinalise. So she knew. But she still acted like, wait, what did that mean exactly? Roxy continued, it's fine. I understand. There's nothing for you to be concerned about. I was the one who took advantage of you when you were feeling weak. Besides, I know under ordinary circumstances, you'd never get involved with someone as tiny and unappealing as me. Tiny and unappealing? That's nonsense. You don't have to comfort me. I'm perfectly aware of how I look. True, she was petite, had no curves, and was thin as a stick. In the feminine department, she would likely lose to Sylphie. But you might also say that she simply had a body of a lolly, and he was the type who could appreciate that. Don't worry. I don't plan to barge into your life. I'm just going to be your left hand for the length of this trip. Just ignore me once it's all over, and look after your wife instead. All right. Still, she really saved him. Doing nothing in return wouldn't be right. He offered to repay her. Offering anything, she just had to name it. Her eyes wavered. He thought, aw crap, maybe I said something wrong. Anything wasn't fine. Anything was exactly what she had done to help him. That's when, yes, Roxy gives her excuses. And it pretty much plays out like the anime, that yes, she fell in love at first sight, and that, yes, later on kept looking at his face. And then at some point when they were at the pub, yes, Elinalise told him that he was actually married. But I think the important thing is what she kind of brings up in that whole sequence is that the idea that, yeah, everybody said that you get back on your feet. But, like it said at the very end of that chapter, she was thinking about something else. And that thing was that she was thinking about the time in Buena Village, that he was broken and that she's seen his weakness. Nobody else has seen his weakness but Roxy. She has seen how fragile he is, that he's not this all-powerful mage that can handle everything. Despite the fact that he was mature for a kid, and despite the fact that he would train with his father, and his father would beat him down and he'd get right back up, he was actually really weak. I remember watching you, Mr. Paul, enjoy your sword fighting together. The two of you got along so well back then, and then suddenly remembered something else. The first time you rode a horse. Back then, you were so terrified. Your body was so tense, and you couldn't move at all. I thought to myself, this kid is so mature and has so much talent, but he's actually weak. Then I remembered all of your interactions with Paul, from when you trained together in the past, to the banter in the labyrinth, and I saw how depressed you were, how listless, and I remember that you were much weaker than you appeared. It felt like Paul meant far more to you than anyone realized. Now that you had lost him, I was afraid that you might sink farther in depression, that you couldn't get yourself back on your own. Of course, I didn't think I'd be the one to help you get back up. I heard that you had someone that you loved. I was sure that person would have the power to get you back together, but you needed them more than ever before, right then. And they weren't there. I felt like someone had to save you. But Elinalise and Geese just planned to leave you be, and Lilia was too busy attending Zenith. So I thought, I'm the only one that could do this. I'm sure that must sound like an excuse, but I didn't intend for it to go that far at first. I did get the feeling that you respected me, but I'm tiny and unattractive. I had no idea who your partner is, but I'm sure they must be a beauty, if she's related to Miss Elinalise. I never thought there'd be a chance that you'd look at me the same way, but I ignored that, thinking it would be fine as long as I did something that could help. But then you suddenly grabbed me, and I saw your face up close. I couldn't help but think, maybe I had a chance. Miss Elinalise and the others had just talked about how sex could cheer men up when they were down. So I just thought, maybe even I can do this. I couldn't help it. I love you. Tears fell down her face. It's such an interesting perspective to get it. Again, the idea that she was technically in love with him, and there's the other side of it that she wants to help him as well. But then that moment comes up to when it actually happens, she's like, I didn't even think it was actually going to happen. You obviously probably not going to like this body. You have a partner that looks probably like Elinalise. I'm nothing in reference to that. But then at that moment, it's like, okay, so it can happen. As she was crying, she said, it was cruel. My feelings for you were obvious, but no one told me that you were married until way after the fact. It wasn't fair. He wondered who those words were directed at. Maybe Elinalise. He failed to mention it as well, as it never came up, but he was equally accountable. Still, if their roles were reversed, he was reunited with Sylphie, she saved him, he'd fall in love with her, then learn that she had a new partner. He'd be shocked too. He wanted to reward Roxy for what she had done. But how could he do that without betraying Sylphie? So that's when he offered that until he got back home, he'd be her lover. Gosh dang it, Rudeus. An idiot. He even questioned his own mind. And then what? What problem would that solve? That wouldn't help her at all. He'd be betraying Sylphie. It would be temporary, and it was the worst proposal that he can come up with. She squeezed him tightly, said it was an incredibly appealing idea, but then tapped her hand against his cheek. But please stop with all that. You don't have to do anything. I think the problem that he has right here is he doesn't realize that she did that for him. Yes, she got a side benefit from it, but she was doing it to save his life. She was doing it for him. It's not a transaction that you have to repay. But yes, from his perspective, he's seeing that he took something that was precious to her, her first time, and was very rough about it, so I guess he would want to actually repay it. He's just really dumb with his words. He didn't have to do anything. If she was fine with that, then he would do as she asked. He'd done everything she told him, and he would continue to do so. That was what she wants, right? After a month, they arrived at Bazaar. They bought souvenirs, some glasswork, a red glass hair accessory with a tribal crest on it, some rice seeds. If it didn't grow, it could always be eaten as is. Elinalise took all the girls to a girl-only party, not as if she was the age of a girl anymore. Lilia refused, saying that she wanted to look after Zenith. Geese and Talhan went their own way as well. While they were taking care of Zenith, Rudeus noticed how she could walk, eat, and go to the bathroom. But she wouldn't talk or proactively do anything herself. She was like a machine carrying out commands. Occasionally, she would stare at his direction, not saying a word. Maybe she felt connected because they were related by blood. The chances of something triggering her memories to return were, well, slim to none. He truly wondered what Paul would do if he was here. Surely he would do a good job, or maybe he would fail. In the middle of the night, Roxy came to see Rudeus, hammered. She told Elinalise everything, letting her pent-up resentment spill forth. For her part, Elinalise had to feel conflicted. She said Roxy was her dearest friend. She had to want to support Roxy's love life, but not at the expense of her granddaughter's marriage. She must have been in a difficult spot. Roxy beat her tiny fist against his chest, then returned to her sleeping quarters. The next day they arrived at the Griffin's edge. He used earth magic to lift them up. The armadillo cowered at the scent of the Griffins, and Rudeus feared having to head back to Bazaar. But after they defeated the Griffins, Geese ate its meat in front of it. It sensed that it was safe and proceeded forward. It's very interesting. Geese learned this trick from one of his demon friends. Eating meat in front of a monster's predator gave him a sense that their own group was superior. When Rudeus asked if his friend had a lizard face, he laughed, saying, "So you know him? Should have figured that you would, boss." Yeah, for those who don't remember, that's the lizard guy that Dead End ran into. They were swapping quests way back on the Demon Continent when Rudeus was with Rajerd and Edis. That would be that guy, Jalil. It took a day's travel to arrive at the desert, another 3 days to pierce the sandstorm. Upon interrupting it, Roxy spoke up with a tinge of jealousy. "So your earth magic is saint level 2. Amazing." Yeah, they don't want to mention that in the anime. They don't want to mention that he's saint level and that he basically got rid of a storm, entire sandstorm with that. From here, they proceeded with caution with the increase of monsters, but they had more numbers this time. They even crushed a sand Garuda and a giant T-Rex-looking lizard. While Rudeus feared that sandworms were posing a threat, Geese was able to sniff them out. According to him, there was this thin donut-shaped ridge in the ground where they were located. Rudeus failed to spot many, so he needed experience. Having mostly women in their party, succubi were easy to dispatch. Rudeus did let his true feelings slip and made a go for Roxy, but other than that, it was uneventful. Oddly, Talhan was unaffected. He just snorted and said, "Of course it doesn't work on me." Apparently, a sound body leads to a sound mind after all. Rudeus, you're not getting it. At the ruins, just as planned, everyone besides Elinalise was blindfolded outside. Shira fussed for a bit, but Viera persuaded her. Yeah, Shira, again, from her trauma from men attacking her after the displacement incident, would not be good with that. The intention was for them to not see the circle. Thus, they wouldn't know what happened. Sadly, the wagon couldn't be taken past the entrance. But they took the armadillo. Good old Dillo. Rudeus figured that Zenith could make it a week on foot, but it didn't matter that the last leg of the journey took a little bit longer. Geese and the others were surprised to see the change of scenery on the other side. Going from the desert to snow, Rudeus warned them strictly to never talk about how they arrived, even if they managed to guess how it was done. That was how they left the Beggaret continent, just a little further, and Rudeus would be home. One more scene. One more scene. We're almost there, guys. Returning to the northern territories, it had to be roughly 4 months since Rudeus set out. Autumn and the Beastmen's mating season had long since passed, leading to a long winter season. Thankfully, the snow had only risen to ankles. A month later, and it would have been up to their chest, making travel to Shariah much more difficult. Rudeus and Elinalise took the lead. Zenith seemed fine, and the armadillo needed regular warming with magic. Everything was fine, he thought. One evening, Elinalise and Rudeus were together on lookout. She spoke up. "Rudeus, there's something I need to talk to you about." Here comes Grandma Elinalise coming in and go, "All right, let me fix the situation." He figured it was about Roxy. He was ready to prostrate himself if she started condemning him. Would she be angry that he was disrespectful to Sylphie, or scold him for sleeping with Roxy? That's when she brought up the Millis faith. He didn't understand what she meant by asking if he was a follower of Millis. He did know there was only one person he could call God, though. That hadn't changed since he was little. Again, putting her on a pedestal. Even after sleeping with her, I honestly, when I read this segment, I thought that would be the moment that he'd finally take her off that pedestal. But no. The Roxy faith is very strong. She still acknowledged, though, in the end, that it still felt good to be on the receiving end of someone that is faithful to them. And that sounded right to Rudeus. He had no doubts it felt good for someone to love them with their whole of their being. and to be loved in the same return. His cheating heart had, however, wandered to Roxy. He did love her, no doubt about that, but he also remembered how miserable he had been when he had Edie. Sylphie was the one that cured him of that and brought happiness back into his life. So he wanted to repay her with love that would fulfill her in return. Those feelings were just as strong. Now here's an interesting part where it feels like they kind of alter things a little bit / removed. When Elinalise brings up the idea that, she's different in her thought process, that, yeah, I think it's okay to love multiple partners. I don't feel like it's wrong. I'm surprised to hear you feel that way. But isn't that insincere? Rudeus asked. It's not insincere, Elinalise replied. If you have 2 people to love, that means the time that you can afford to give to each one of them is halved, right? Rudeus asked. It's not like you're with each other all day long, right? It won't be halved. It might be a little less than before, but that's all right. Rudeus thought, so it wasn't a problem even if the first partner's affection was reduced? Humans could be oblivious to emotional upticks, but rather sensitive when it came to minute reductions. It would be terrible if Sylphie began to think that his love for her was dwindling. That's a true concept there. You can get more time or emotion, but when it goes down, that's when you kind of pick up on it. That's when she asked if Zenith was unhappy. The shots of them back in the past together, all together with Norn and Aisha, is so cute. It hurts. It hurts. Happy or unhappy wasn't the issue here, but Zenith hadn't been particularly unhappy. Things were the same as before. In fact, she grew closer to Lilia and looked happier for it. Paul may have been unhappy, given that he was suddenly on the receiving end of both their attacks, but perhaps that was a kind of happiness in itself, one that would never return. What exactly is it that you want to say, Elinalise? Remembering Paul brought back grief. It may worsen if he kept talking about him. At this point, he just wanted to hear what her point was. Take Roxy as your wife. You love her, don't you? She said. Miss Elinalise, is it really okay for you to say that? You're Sylphie's grandmother. Shouldn't you be looking after her happiness? He had no right to blame her. He was the one that had the affair. One that broke his oath. That fact didn't change. Yet he took an accusatory tone. Yes, Elinalise said. I can say that. No one else can say it but me. She said that, haughtily. I realized that I shouldn't say this, but before I was Sylphie's grandmother, I was Roxy's close friend. That's the important thing to realize, is that she's conflicted here because Sylphie is her granddaughter, but she's been with Roxy for a long time, and it's one of her closest friends. Rudeus realized that she was talking the order in which they met. She met Roxy first, then encountered Sylphie. Elinalise continued, honestly, I can't stand to look at Roxy the way she is now. She yearns to throw herself into a relationship and lean on you, but is forcing herself to hang back, just because she happened to meet you too late. Put that way, Rudeus felt bad for Roxy, but he also felt bad for Sylphie. Elinalise continued, if you part on bad terms, I have no doubt she'll lead a miserable life. It's possible some dirtbag will take advantage of her, treat her terribly, and sell her off as collateral for his unpaid loans, causing her to end up bearing the child of a man she doesn't even know. Isn't that going a bit too far? Rudeus replied. I know a woman who led to life. Elinalise seems to know a lot of interesting people. Speaking so frankly, Rudeus wondered if she was speaking from her own experience. I want Roxy to be happy, she continued, even if that happiness comes with conditions. I mean, I want the same, Rudeus replied. Rudeus, I know you can do it. You can love Sylphie and Roxy just the same. You're Paul's son after all. You should be able to do it. Could he? No, definitely. He loved them both equally. He did, and could. But was that really okay? Wasn't that self-serving? No, Sylphie is my only... Elinalise cut him off. I didn't plan to say this. Here it is. Here's the crazy moment the enemy skipped. I didn't plan to say this, but when we drank together in Bazaar, Roxy told me that her monthly visitor hadn't come. Huh? Monthly visitor? Oh wait, he knew what that was. But did that mean... Well, it's not for certain yet, Elinalise added. They did do the deed. It was possible, Rudeus thought. Plus, the night that she got drunk, she came over and beat him on the chest. Maybe that was a sign. Rudeus, if Roxy really is pregnant with your child, what will you do? Her question conjured an image of Paul back in the day. When Lilia was pregnant, he looked so pitiful. Rudeus saved him back then, when he was helpless. Now, Rudeus thought of him as a man deserving respect, but that didn't mean he wanted to make the same mistake that he had. I'll do what must be done, which is, I'll marry her. Because she's pregnant, suddenly, okay, now I gotta marry her. The moment those words left his mouth, he felt his heart drop to his stomach. He loved Sylphie, but he also wanted to marry Roxy and have her part of his family. He didn't want anyone else to take her. He wanted to make her his. It was selfish of him. He did the same thing with Sylphie, got her pregnant, and now desires another woman. It was unforgivable. Only a piece of garbage could think the way he was thinking. Rudeus said the same of Paul so many times. Called him a piece of garbage. Rudeus was a man too. Now that he had 2 women that he loved and wanted, couldn't he do his best to have them both? Just like Paul had done? Perhaps Sylphie would have been disgusted with him, and Roxy would abandon him. But wasn't that worth trying, even if he lost both? Oh right, it wasn't up to him. He spoke up. Whether Roxy and Sylphie would agree is a different story. Indeed. Well, I'll go get Roxy. But yeah, that's when she goes off and Roxy comes back. Which that whole part kind of plays out the same way, that he wants to, you know, marry her, that she's very important to him. He respects her a lot. As he was struggling to figure out how he would actually say it, not so please be a second wife, he just had to say it. No matter how he spun it, it was the same. He was not splitting up with Sylphie, but instead was trying to bring her into the family. Without Sylphie's input first, he would have to get her approval after the fact. That was exactly the kind of thing a garbage human being would do. Still, he had to say it now. Roxy might wander off if he didn't. She was the kind who immediately set off after a job was done. Yep, she'd done it before. If he didn't stop her now, it might be too late. If he was going to regret it later, then he might as well blurt it out now, even if it made him a piece of shit. And that's when he asked, would you mind change your name to Roxy Greyrat as well? And then yes, really, it hit her. The emotions swept over her. I appreciate you saying that, truly, but are you sure you shouldn't get your wife's approval first? Of course, he would consult Sylphie. Explain it to his sisters and Lilia too. I do need her approval, he replied. In that case, Rudeus thought she was going to turn him down. It seemed that Roxy wanted him to choose her, and only her after all. In that case, she continued, please ask me again once you receive her approval. She had a serious look on her face, as the snow sprinkled down around them. Ask again, it echoed in his mind. His body heated up as he registered that she hadn't rejected him. And that is the episode. That is the episode. That is an extremely long recording skip content video for this episode. Again, I assume this is going to be a long skip content video and a lot of stuff to go through. So much crazy stuff in here. My afterthoughts overall with the anime episode itself. Very disappointed. I tried to give the benefit of the doubt to the adaptation. I know there's a lot that has to be cut, but like I said before this episode even came out, I was scared about this episode. And again, I think it's a lot to do with Rudeus in his mind. If you think about it, like a good chunk of this skip content video is the first 5 minutes of the episode, like leading up to them betting each other. And that's sad because, again, what is it skipping? It's skipping so much in Rudeus' mind about how he failed and how Paul gave up his life for somebody that's a fake. It is, again, realizing I did that before. I didn't care about my parents. They supported me. I lived under their roof for a long time, and I didn't even go to their funeral. And now here, my father's dead. I just held a funeral for him, and the same thing has happened again, where I didn't recognize him as a father. I didn't recognize Zenith as a mother. I didn't recognize a family as a family, and now I did it again. And now it's too late to have been able to bond and experience having parents again, even in this new life. Even though I told myself I was going to do good this time, this was the time I was going to live it up, and I failed to even recognize them, and it's too late now. It is devastating and so heartbreaking. And again, like I said, a lot of it has to do with essentially Roxy stepping out there and lifting him up out of his darkness because they weren't going to make it home. The idea here, to give people a context here, is when they're all waiting for Rudeus to get better, he's not eating anything. His face is sunken in. He's getting some water in his system, but he can only survive for so much longer now. He's going to die. And he is critical to getting home because they have Zenith, who is a husk, and they have to drag her everywhere and tend to her. And they have to travel through the Beggar continent, one of the dangerous continents ever. And so there's two factors here. One, I would argue they could not take the teleporter. Even though Elinalise knows where it's at, they wouldn't be able to get to it. I don't even think that Rudeus would have made it to that sandstorm alive. And they need Rudeus to get rid of that sandstorm. It's sort of described as almost like a barrier, and it reforms itself. And he had to use Saint tier earth magic to get rid of it. Roxy may cumulonimbus, maybe she could have done Saint tier level water magic to get rid of it, but highly doubt it. They needed Rudeus to get rid of that sandstorm. So even with the idea of where the teleporter is from Elinalise, they probably couldn't get to it, or many of them could have died on the way there, not having Rudeus at their side. So it does kind of push the idea they would have to travel a normal route, go back home over several years, taking the normal route through a port and whatnot, and would have Zenith survived? For sure, Rudeus wouldn't have survived. It would have been way too long, unless at some point, for some reason, suddenly he stops puking up his food. He was going to die. So it was something that had to be done, unfortunately. And again, Elinalise and Talahan sort of indicated that they thought, or Geese, maybe possibly too, thought that he can get back on his feet. But again, Roxy knew that he couldn't. So again, it turns into one of those mistakes that kind of has to happen, but is there another choice? And it does go into the mindset of this world being so different, that having multiple wives is normal in this world. The only people that don't is the Millis Church. That's why Elinalise asked that. Are you a faith? Is your faith in that? Is selfies? Well, then what's the problem here? It doesn't, it's so out of the norm. And a lot of this mindset that Reese has is partly from his previous life, but also, yeah, he told Sylphie, I'm going to be faithful. Even though she said it's fine. If you want to take multiple, that's fine. No. I'm faithful to you. That's what obviously hurts him, that I failed to do that. But it is what it is, unfortunately. It is what it is. A lot of stuff has to get cut. And I hope that a lot of what was cut wasn't because of, obviously, the expectations that Refugian has. But we'll see, though. I like I said before, I'm going to keep an eye on his Twitter and see how he responds to it. People probably obviously speaking up and saying, what are you talking about? What's the deal here? Because I think there's going to be some interesting thought process there as to what choices they made here, and was it affected by some desire to make this more acceptable to a lot of people. But it is what it is. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed the skip content / impressions video. As always, if you did, make sure that like button down below, comment, let me know what's the episode. If you're an anime only, let me know if what I covered that was skip content was conveyed to you. Like, did you pick up on all this stuff? Did it make sense to you and you didn't need to have that extra context? I'd love to hear from you guys. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe before you leave. Additionally, if you like this content and you want to support this content more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, so thanks to membership button below. Greatly appreciate what it does. Until next time, y'all take care.